Ryan and I just played Katmai. This is a new 2-player game all about bears. In fact, the bears of Brooks River. A little story behind this. It's a place in Alaska, and apparently tons of bears descend upon this thing, I assume annually, for all the salmon.
Yeah.
Which is effectively what we're doing in this game.
If you didn't know that already, bears like to eat salmon.
They do.
It's a big
I like
thing.
to eat salmon.
And bears come to this river and they fight over prime places on this river to pick salmon out of the water, fish effectively. And that is exactly what you're doing in this game. It gives you a number of spaces that you can place your bear meeples, or beeples, as they are called. You'll place your bear meeples and you are effectively fighting your opponent for that spot. This is a 2-player game. It's 1v1. So it's my bears versus David's bears in a fight for these fish. But it's not as simple as just getting your bears down in these spots.
No, this is going to be based on all of the scoring that happens. Now, we have scoring cards out here at the end that are sort of the more advanced scoring. They do have a whole set of cards that you can use instead for a more simplistic game. But using the advanced ones in particular, but even the other ones, game after game is going to make the game feel very, very different because you're going to be very specifically going after different goals. As you can see on all these tiles, and the tiles are these individual squares here, there's a lot of icons in 4 different sort of sectors of each tile. Some of those scoring cards are going to want you to be on rocks, so you want to put your bears on rocks. Some are going to be wanting you to put on other things. Some of them are going to have various, like very specific things where I have a group of 4 or more bears, but none of them are on rocks. Stuff like that. And you're going to score maybe 1 salmon for these low ones, 2. And then there's going to always be an end game scoring one, again, if you're using these cards.
Yeah, and that is the goal, is to select the best spaces to fulfill these scoring conditions. So if you think of this like the solution to the puzzle, down here is where you're placing all of your pieces. So right off the bat, this is very much going to appeal to gamers that like that puzzle solving pattern matching kind of game where you're looking at the board and immediately thinking, okay, well, this spot might fulfill multiple conditions. Right. And then there may be some of these cards want you to be on multiple tiles, because as you're playing cards, and the action in this game is completely driven by cards, as you're playing them, you need to be aware of not only what's going to be valuable for you on this particular turn, but also what's going to be valuable to you in future turns, because this is not a game where you know exactly how many turns you're going to get, because there are a few different ways the game can end. And so you're always kind of having to watch, what other players' supply is looking like, because if anybody ever gets down to 0, 1, or 2 bears, that can trigger the game. And the number of bears that you're going to put out is going to change every round based on who is taking control of these different tiles. And that's where the card play really comes into the game.
Yeah, and the card play is really what makes it quite a bit different. Everything we've described thus far, a lot of games fall into that category. And in fact, I've seen some other games that use similar card play to this, but you're actually going to be playing your bears across from each other on these different tiles. But the way you do that is kind of interesting. At the beginning of every round, you're going to shuffle up all of your specific bears, and each of you have your own deck. Effectively all of the same cards.
Yeah, it starts off as a completely symmetrical deck. So you know every card that your opponent has. You can look through your deck and you know whatever you can do, they can do, to a point.
To a point, because before you start playing cards, before you even draw cards, you take the top 2 off and put them out. So imperfect information already, because you might lose 2 cards that you were really hoping to use, because some of them are a little bit more aggressive than others. Then you draw 2 cards, and you're always going to basically have 2 cards in your hand. And on your turn, the person with this first player marker is going to place a card face down at any one of the locations. So the other player, the only information they have is where they're playing their card. Then they play a card face down. Those are revealed. Now, the bears can be a number of different things. They're all adorable, and they all have different names, which is fantastic. But some of them are just values. As you can see here, we got a 2, 2, a 4, and a 4. But some of them have little icons and some text at the bottom that let them do specific things. There might be one that says, I am of the same value of the bear that's played on top of me. There's bears that I can play that make Ryan move one of his bears, or the top bear from his stack at that location, to another location of my choice.
Yeah.
So there's some definitely jockeying around and sort of interaction, but really just with maybe a couple few of the bears.
Yeah, and it is aggressive. Like, it is very much an in-your-face kind of PvP where it's just 2 players, so everything you're doing is against your other player. You're really trying to get into their head. When they play a card face down, you don't necessarily know what card it's going to be. It could be one of those simple values, or it could be one that causes you to move a bear, or there's some that make your bears worth 0 strength. Because at the end, the strength is what matters. And there's some bears that get more powerful if there's certain features on that tile, or there's bears that get more powerful based on how many cards you each have. So it is very much a mind game. And that even applies to playing your cards, because like David said, that first player marker, that player is the one that's going to put their card down first. And some of these tile like spaces, maybe I'm not going to put a card there if the first player doesn't as well. Like I'm already winning that spot. So on your turn, you can actually force the other player to take the first player marker. You can give it to them, and now it's their turn to play. And they can't give it back to you that round. They can give it back to you next time, but you're basically saying, I don't want to go first this time. But you kind of want to be first at a certain point, because once all the cards are revealed and we get into the scoring phase, some of these cards can be used as a tiebreaker, and everybody has a little tiebreaker token they can use, but first player gets first choice.
Yeah.
So if you're tied with somebody, in that case, maybe you do want to be. So you really need to think about the perfect moment to force your opponent to be first, or when you want to keep it for yourself.
Yeah, it's even interesting on the tiebreaker. While this didn't happen in one of our games, there are situations where you could be tied in multiple locations.
Yeah.
I have the first player marker, so I'm like, oh, I could break this tie, but do I want to break this tie instead because of one of the scoring things that's going on? Maybe Ryan's sitting there quietly going, oh, please go ahead, break the tie, because I want that
Right.
location. So there's some interesting things at play. Now, after you've played all your cards, and it's going to be 10 cards that you played and then the 2 that are out, you're going to leave all the beeples where they are. So the beeples or the bear meeples will collect on these tiles. You take all of your cards back, you shuffle them back up, ditch 2 of them again, draw 2, you keep playing until, like Ryan said, one of a couple things happen. One is if at the end of the round or during cleanup, someone's down to 0, 1, or 2 bears, you're going to move on to scoring. But you can actually finish the game almost immediately if at the end of cleanup, someone has more than 4 or more bears than the other player.
Which is hard to do. You really have to dominate to
very,
get that.
very hard. It would be kind of crazy to get that to happen. So in most cases, it's going to go down to scoring, which I think is where you'd want it. If it went the other way, I mean, it must be possible to go that way.
Sure, I think it's possible. If somebody, and that's the thing too, somebody might be too focused on the scoring and maybe really wanting to score these 2 tiles and go, if I could just get these 2 tiles, I will score a bunch of points, but not realizing, oh, now you only have 2 bears on the board and I have 7, so it's game over.
Yeah.
Right? So you can't just focus on, you kind of have to spread out, but you really want to spread out anyway. At least for the advanced scorings, it wants you to be like, we had some that wanted you to build chains, or some that wanted you to go spaces that touch each other. So they're definitely conflicting as far as like, you can't just score everything all the time. You really need to decide.
You're not going to score everything all the time. We've only played this just the one time, so it may be a lighter score here, but this was 9-5.
Yeah.
So it might get a little bit more than that, but you're not going to get like a ton of points in this game.
Well, yeah, it was 9-5, and it came down to, we had one card. There was one that was an in-game scoring card only, that only one player could get, that was worth 3 points, and was for having the longest chain. So we were 5-9. Basically, it came down to that, who had the longest chain by the end of the game, and that was the person that ended up winning. So I'm not going to say it's always going to come down to that, but the fact that they have that, so you can kind of be building towards that. But again, it's only 3 points. So you can't ignore everything else and just hope to win on that one.
And those will always be 1, 2, and 3
Yeah.
points. So it's not going to be a wild range of different types of scoring that you're going to do. Just so much that the things that you're doing to get those points will vary.
Yeah.
Now we talk about generally who things are for, who games are not for. This one, I think, obviously, if you're into 2-player games that have, maybe a little interesting twist, I think this fits the bill. It is pretty aggressive at times.
But it's quick, too.
It is very quick. One other thing I wanted to point out, this might be something that registers with you. It takes a minute to get used to all the cards.
Yeah.
Obviously, the cards that are just values, fine. The cards, and there's not even that many of them, but the cards that have powers, guaranteed your first game, you're going to go, okay, and I got this one. Oh, no, I've got that one.
It happened to us on our first game.
Because you're like, oh, that's right, that card. Because once you start stacking the cards, you kind of like forget what some of the powers are. Again, when you first play. That's probably going to go away in subsequent plays.
Yeah, and I think this is not that cozy Sunday morning 2-player game where you're building your little T-guard. This is aggressive.
It's not chill.
It's not chill. You need to know going into it. This is definitely a game where your moves are going to be countered. I mean, that's the whole thing. Is like you can work on building your own thing, but most of the time you're going to be wanting to try to counter whatever your opponent is doing, and that comes with the knowledge that they're going to be countering you as well. So I would say, as far as all of these 2-player duel games that we've been playing, this one might be a little bit more focused on that block your neighbor sort of mechanic, where it's like, you put one there, I'm going to put one there. Now I see you setting up a pattern, I'm going to mess up your pattern. Like it is kind of that game,
yes.
For better or worse.
Speaking of blocking, even as opposed to scoring, this didn't happen with us, but once you get to know the game, one difference between 2 of our cards is the card works the same way. Is this one of your cards? Yeah. Ryan's card's Diver. Diver's dominance is 5 when placed against a tile with any unoccupied deep pool. So, just to give you a sense for this, it's a 3 naturally, but it's a 5 if it's any location that has one of these deep pool symbols without a bear on it. Now, here's the interesting thing there. Early game, there's no bears out, so this card is bound to be decent. It's bound to be a 5 if he plays it correctly. Later in the game, they might be covered. Maybe I know that he has, this is his only card that does this. I could cover the deep pools, and we have some scoring cards here that want us to.
Yeah.
It's going to make this card weaker as you play if all the deep pools are covered.
Oh, I mean, definitely. And that's part of the game. So I would say definitely, like, you have to know yourself. Don't get frustrated when your perfect setup falls apart.
Sure.
Because that's the game. And you're doing it to your opponent too. You're trying to mess up their perfect setups the same way. I mean, that's fun for a lot of people. I mean, and even for somebody like me, maybe, where I don't necessarily like the PvP.
Well, I generally don't.
It wasn't too much.
No, it's not.
It was, and the reason that is, and this goes back to maybe who it's for, once your bear's down, that's down. So you can at least rely on the fact that, okay, I've got this pattern, nobody can mess this pattern up.
Oh, the bear meeples.
You're not taking your opponent's bear meeples off the board once they're down. So if I'm building up to some of these scoring cards, at least that part is kind of safe. So it does give you a little bit, once you get to the end of the round. Now, getting that bear meeple there is going to be maybe really difficult, but once it's down, it's down.
Yeah, it depends on how you build it too. Like, no one can move those things. I could win that location and then stop Ryan from maybe getting his 4th bear in a row or something like that.
This becomes a really important
if
tile.
If I'd placed here, then this would never be a 4 until, he could place here or here. But again, it could be a point of contention if you want to fight for that. It's probably not worth continually fighting for that over and over and over.
And it might be, depending on how many points it gets you. And there is the situation. So like David said, some of these bears can even move people's bears around. And there's only 3 bears can be in one spot. So you could have 3 total cards. So you could be in a situation where you think you're going to play your 4, and then David plays a card that moves a card. He moves a 1 onto your stack. And now next thing you know, like, you were about to win that spot. Now you've lost it and you can't possibly play another card onto it. But again, that is the whole game.
Yeah.
That leans into the fun of what the game is.
Yeah, that sort of, those interesting cards and sort of getting used to navigating those is probably one of the more interesting things. And I do want to say again, the way the first player markers is also a really interesting twist, because the moment it dawns on you, you're like, oh, actually, yeah, here, you take the first player marker because I don't want to go
first.
Except for wanting to hold on to it for that tiebreaker.
It depends, because the way those cards trigger can matter. Like,
well, that too.
If I'm planning on moving one of your cards, I don't want to risk you putting another card on top of that card, in which case you generally can only interact with the top card. Or vice versa. If I have a really powerful card in my hand that I don't want David to move, I don't want to risk me playing it and him moving it, because that guessing game of anticipating, he knows what I have left, minus 2 cards. He might have an idea, like he might have that card that, blah, 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 blah. So I want to see where he plays so that I can play a card in response to it and like move it somewhere else.
Yeah.
And, so there are definitely situations where going second is better.
Yeah. Order of operations is definitely going to come into your mind as you determine whether or not you want to hold on to that, and where you're playing cards.
For sure.
Even when you're scoring them, you kind of go from upstream down, which may have some impact on how things play out during the scoring. But that is Katmai. If you have any questions about it, please make them in the comments below. We'll get down there and talk to you as long as you want to about it. Until next time, though, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.